Hey, thanks a lot for having me here. Like the other speakers, I have a bit of a mixed background. I spent a lot of time painting and drawing, but professionally I'm a computer scientist, and so I've spent a lot of my career developing algorithms to automatically create paintings or drawings in different ways. This is one art installation I made a long time ago in which you walk up to it and it paints a picture of you, and as you move around the painting, it is updated. And so I'm really interested in thinking about the relationship of artists and computers, and what it means to have computers that have more and more autonomy in the artistic process, and what opportunities it provides for us in the future. But here I'm really going to focus on what we call artificial intelligence technology, which is obviously a lot of hype, a lot of excitement and interest. I think which became most first known, I think the broader public with the deep dream algorithm from Google a few years ago, and then the neural style transfer one that Michael mentioned. That became popular on a lot of people's phones and stuff. And now there's like this explosion of people playing around with these tools, people making neural network generating movie scripts, and generating band names with neural networks, knitting patterns. And these things have gotten a lot of attention then in the mainstream art world. There's like this is the first gallery show that I saw that was sponsored by Google. But then a lot of fairly big name contemporary artists are starting to play with neural network techniques. And then, as a result, then it's the popular media, so this is from the satire of Silicon Valley.
I like it. It's really cool. So who painted it? A machine.
It's actually the first work of art made by AI to be sold at Sotheby's.
So that was a year and a half ago. 6 months later, this work that was computer generated, sold at Christie's for $500,000. This is how they signed it. The main governing equation for generative adversarial networks. And all this work is directly influenced or directly comes out of work from the academic research community. So there's one paper which has some really nice results called Creative Adversarial Networks. But the authors of the paper make some fairly strong claims. In their intro to the paper they write, we propose a new system for generating art. The system generates art by looking at art and learns about style, and their system becomes creative. So they're really saying some strong things. These things get picked up in the media, artificial intelligence painters invent new styles of art, and as we go down into the depth of the Daily Mail, the AI artist that can create its own painting style. And so then these messages get believed, I think. So here's Jerry Saltz, who's one of the foremost artists in the world, discussing some of this work. And and the thing to look for is, what does he think the computer's role in all of this is?
Initial thoughts, incredibly dull, generic, boring. The programmers are not freeing up the program. I want the robot to tap into its inner robot. Be free.
I don't know how much this is really for entertainment value. There's no caveats in the video. It really seems like he just bought into it, like the computer's just making art. But obviously that seems like quite a bit of an exaggeration. And so in all of this, there's this discussion of whether computers can create art. On one hand, there's videos like this where it's just assumed that they're just doing it. But on the other hand, I think that when most of us discuss these things, or when I talk to people casually, there's really a sense of course, machines can't make art because they don't have a soul, or they don't have a thing they have to express, or something like that. And so there's this intuition, but it's not really very scientific. It's hard to think about how exactly do you think about that question. And so the main points I'm going to make are that first, I think these AI tools are this technology, like all of the kinds of technology that I'll talk about. There are things that advance the field, advance the expressive power that artists have and give us new ways to communicate. And I believe only really social agents can make art, and I mean something very specific by that, which I'll tell you about. And there are scenarios in which computers can be artists, but these are complete science fiction. And finally, John asked me to talk a little bit about what's going on in the space, so I'm also going to survey a lot of the neural network generated art and the themes in that art that I find exciting, and I think that if I was going to be working as an artist in the space, that I would want to build on that and learn about it. So, like the other speakers, I think it's really worth going back in history and seeing all the times when things like this have happened before. And throughout history, we see technology has transformed and often, quote, disrupted art in various ways. So 15th century, the development of oil paint or advancement of it by Van Eyck, was transformative. Before we had fresco, that was very tonally limited, it was very inconvenient and practical to work with. Some of the oil paints gave much more expressive range to artists in terms of what they could achieve visually. And then over the following centuries, artists got better and better at creating rich, detailed, realistic views of the world, things that look just visually dazzling. And this is very highly valued in artists that they could create such extraordinary imagery. And us today, in a world where we're surrounded by film and video and photography of all kinds, I think it may be hard for us to appreciate just how special this was, that the only way that you could see such a realistic image like this was to go into the gallery of the right artists. You had to be in the right place at the right time, and only a certain kind of person with a certain kind of training could do this. And so the artist's identity was highly tied up within the ability to create these types of images. An artist is someone who creates dazzling or beautiful, evocative images that are also visually dazzling. And so the warning signs for this worldview came with people playing around with photography. So this is likely the first photograph of a real scene. And as people started toying with these tools, of course, Instagramming the food. This is probably the first photo that has a person in it because it was like I think 10 or 30 minute exposure. And the reason why why you can see someone is that there's someone in the lower left corner there who is getting his shoe shine, so he was standing still for a long enough time to be imaged. Yeah, then they're taking selfies. So the real conflicts begin with the public the demonstration of the daguerreotype. So Daguerre created a technique that other people could use, and he didn't patent it because the French government bought him out because they felt it was of value to society. And now here's a machine that seems to do the thing that artists do, that is part of the artist's identity. And so even from these very first demonstrations, one classical painter, Paul Del Roche, is quoted as having said, "From today, painting is dead. Here's a machine that replaces artists." And so there's, so what really happened? Well, there's different ways that painting and photography interact. So there's more a practical one, which is portraiture. So, as today, we like to keep around pictures of ourselves, our ancestors, our family, our friends. And you could either be extraordinarily wealthy and have a portrait taken, or you can sit for a silhouette, which is really just not a great likeness. And so these things were completely disrupted by photography. So you would sit in the chair for 8 minutes, get your image, have your neck at a brace, grip the armrest so you don't move around too much. And as a result, suddenly this technology is clearly superior to the alternatives. We have today these incredibly rich, beautifully vibrant photographs of people from the era because this technology existed. That was the photographer Matthew Grady, the author George Sand. And so essentially within a few decades, portraiture became anyone who did portraiture essentially had to retrain themselves and learn this new technology. But so in the fine art world, this is where the interesting questions I would say are. And there's this debate for many decades of whether photography is really art. And so on one side, there were the hobbyists and the amateurs and tinkerers who played around with cameras and tried to make better pictures. And quite often with the new technology, people are mimicking the styles of the old technology. So here they created landscapes, they created classical compositions of timeless themes. So this is a multiple exposure combined in the 1850s, very much in the style of classical painting. And as the painting fashions became more gauzy and atmospheric, so did the photography styles. And essentially through decades of development and improving the artistic use of the technology, this technology became accepted as an artistic medium. And today we think of photography as another valid form of art with its own style and history. On the other side, of course, there are the traditionalists like the famous poet Charles Baudelaire, who wrote, "If photography is allowed to stand in for art, it will corrupt it completely thanks to the stupidity of the multitude." That's us. But the real challenge was for the artists themselves, because now their identity is challenged and they have to rethink what it is that an artist does. And so the first argument, or the first sort of point of this that Whistler made, he argued that the imitator is a poor kind of creature. If the man contains only the tree or flower or other surface he sees before him or an artist, the king of artists would be the photographer. It is for the artist to do something beyond this. And so he originated this sort of gauzy, hazy visual style I mentioned he called it tonalism. So he's already trying to do something which is no longer exactly dazzling visual realism. Just a little more evocative. But then the next step is, why are we making things look real at all? So Van Gogh, in a letter to his brother, his sort of pivotal year, 1888, wrote, "Accurate drawing is not the essential thing to aim at, because the reflection of reality in a mirror would be nothing, not a picture at all, and no more than a photograph." So the point is that from this point on, artists were no longer thought of themselves people who make realistic images. And I would argue that we probably would not have the modern art movement if it were not for photography. This is what really catalyzed this shift in perspective as to what an artist is. So to summarize, photography, at first it looked like photography automated art, does what it is artists do. Many artists feared and disparaged it. In reality, we got a new art form. We rethought what it meant to be an artist. Portraitures, making portrait photography more efficient, more effective. And now actually we have this tool that hobbyists can use. We can all essentially be artists taking pictures with our phones whenever we want. So one of the results of this, the modern art movement, and this sort of long period of discovery, was this notion that whatever an artist can be art. That you can find a urinal, put it in a museum, and call it art. You can tape a banana to a wall with duct tape and call that art. Until someone needs it. But it's really about the context, and the way it's used is not about necessarily the particular materials or the execution of making art. And so broadly, different people use this word different ways. I use it very broadly to mean all sorts of things: painting, conceptual art, music, dance, movies, theater, and so on. But specifically within the world of computing, there is a long history of people using computers to make art. So prior to computing, Sol LeWitt and John Cage were both known for writing procedures and rules that could be executed to produce a work. Sol LeWitt in particular, one of the founders of conceptual art, one of the leaders, his paintings are really lists of instructions, and his artwork is that list of instructions, and anyone else can go, well, other people are allowed to go and actually paint the thing on the wall. And there's actually really interesting stories about how you can still have a Sol LeWitt at your house, but you have to pay for it to be erased from wherever it was before. From the point that people could start making images with computers, artists started playing with them. So in the 60s, when it was like before punch cards, when people were plugging cables into each other, people started playing around with procedural generative art. One of the most important computer artists of the 20th century is Harold Cohen. He started as a classical painter in the 60s, writing rules for himself and then following those rules. And then he discovered Fortran, and then he was like, I'm going to follow these rules. And so he spent the rest of his career authoring software that created an infinite stream of either realistic, figurative images or abstract ones. And these works for the Tate and a lot of other major collections. And he used what was the AI software of the day. At the time, people called AI lists of instructions and procedures and random number generators. Throughout, then we have drawing tools like Deluxe Paint, Mac Paint, Photoshop. There's a drawing Andy Warhol did, and always the same questions. Is it really art? Another class of AI tools is the evolutionary tools, which also are meant to mimic biological processes. Carl Sims's crowdsourced virtual creatures, where people can vote on which ones they like, and then it evolves newer ones. It's really cool stuff. And then electric sheep screensaver, which are procedural animation. People could save their CRT screens with, and you vote on which ones you like, and it would evolve new ones. And it was just endlessly dazzling when it came up with. Computer animation, with more of a popular art form, has the same story. It's really something that comes about as a collaboration of artists and scientists. Originally, the folks at the Lucasfilm Computer Division, who were developing a lot of these technologies, they would go to Disney and try to convince the animators or the business people they should adopt computer tools to help make animations. And this is in the days of like Beauty and the Beast and so on. And they always said the animators were frightened of the computer. They felt that it was going to take away their jobs. And so instead, these folks founded Pixar. And in reality, computer animation is extraordinarily labor intensive. You have all these knobs and tools, dials you have to fill to make every little second of an animated film look the way it does and move the way it does. And that's why when you watch any computer animated film, the credits list goes on and on and on, because so many people were required in order to make it work. And this is a looping video. In my own work, I've spent a lot of time writing code that places brush strokes to match the image, like in this work I showed before, or style transfer methods. So this is from almost 20 years ago, where I was copying the style of one drawing to apply to a photograph. And even though it's working from some data, it's doing it in a way which I've authored the code, and I've told it, do this thing here and do this thing here. And I would say the same is true for all of our modern AI-driven art software as well. So my main point here is that all this computer-generated art is human-made, just as Janet mentioned as well. It all comes from humans, even though computers are involved in the process. And in a way, part of the issue is these bold, ridiculous claims people make. So in the very first days of what we call machine learning in the 50s, they developed a perceptron and then predicted it would be able to walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself, and be conscious of its own existence. And this is a simple linear model. It's just multiply a bunch of numbers, add them together, and that's what's going to be able to be conscious. In reality, so one article I think is a really nice one that discusses a lot of the hype and the overclaims in the context of AI. It's one 7 days into AI by Rod Brooks, which I saw mentioned on Janet's last slide as well. And in reality, when you manipulate, even with our current AI algorithms, when you're working with these algorithms, you're really writing code, you're manipulating the network's training rates. And so one of my favorite neural network artists is Helena Sarin, and she compares it to watercolor. That if you've ever used watercolor, it feels like it has a mind of its own. You have to learn how to guide it and how to control it and work with it. And working with these neural network algorithms, I think is often the same. And anyone who's working with these algorithms as well these days is also curating the results. They're, they take a bunch of images that they have. They decide, this guy has built a Tinder-like interface for which images he likes, he doesn't like, and those will might be part of what's exhibited in the end or train the next version of the algorithm. And I think any prediction people make, about how this technology is going to specifically, what's actually going to happen is very hard. If you ask people 60 years ago, what is life going to be like in the 2010s? Well, we're all going to be living on the moon with our space cars, and computers will be small enough to fit in a single room. In reality, the way our expectations about how things are going to evolve are often way off. In reality, we get these ridiculous, predictions about what AI is going to do in the future. I think the safest prediction is it's more tools that are going to be used for accelerating existing processes. So the current tools are all really very much software that we write and we fiddle with. There's still the question of whether someday that will change, whether computers could be artists in the future. And it's something which, like I mentioned, is an undercurrent of a lot of this discussion. And I think it's hard to figure out the right way to ask the question. What is the actual crux of the issue?
Symphony? Can a robot write a symphony? Can a robot turn a canvas into a beautiful masterpiece? Can you?
So this I call this an attribute theory of art. People say artists have some kind of attribute that is artists are things that make art, they are creative, they do things that are surprising, they have intent. And so we just need to have a computer that can do those things, and then it'll be an artist. And I think that sounds great, but it's a very seductive argument until you actually operationalize it and you build that piece of software that does that thing, and then you think, this is still a software that I wrote that's following the instructions I gave it. But we don't even require these attributes of humans. Art doesn't have to be good. Children can make art, and the parents and their friends might like it, but it's not going to be in a gallery, but it's still art. People often talk about the idea that art has to have an intent, or it has to have an expression. And I guess I actually don't really relate to this. I believe these things, but I don't think it's a qualifying factor, because these things are easy to automate. We can do this now. We can write code that has some variable saying, this is the meaning of my work. We could train a network on a bunch of artist statements, and it would generate some similar, statements, and that's fine. But I think it's still very, software driven. And so I think the key, I come back to this idea that whatever an artist is does can be art. And so the real question is, what can be an artist? And I believe very much in the evolutionary theory of art, which I find it very persuasive. And I recommend very much this book, which provides a very beautiful case for it. And basically, the argument is that the reasons we create art are for various evolutionary reasons. We create to share, to be able to give gifts, as displays of fitness for mating, as displays of social status, as displays of tribal affiliations, as well as for various kinds of communication. And all of these, but especially the first three of these, are really about social relationships. They are things that we do in order to affect our relationships with other people, to express connection, to display dominance, to form some other kind of connection. And so I believe, or I hypothesize, that art can only be created by agents capable of these kinds of social relationships. So we might talk to your phone, to like the conversational agent, say like, oh, Siri, what time is it? And it might talk back to you. But you only view it as a means to an end. You don't view it as a person, you don't empathize with it, you don't care about its feelings. And so that's not really a social relationship. There are a bunch of artists that have been, animals that have been presented as artists. And the interesting thing here is that really we say like, well, the artist has a social relationship. The only question is really, does the animal view the work it's making as a work, or is it just enjoy interacting with its trainer or playing paint on canvas? We generally don't view natural processes as artists, even though they can create amazing experiences, and just because there's no intent, author behind it. And so what this means is, if we could ever create AI that has human-level consciousness and that behaves the way we do, then obviously such a thing could be an artist. But this is utter science fiction. May never happen. Maybe 100 years. It's not on the horizon now. We have a lot of social conversational agents, Eliza, chatbot, Siri, Alexa, Cortana, Pero, Therapeutic Seals, Neko Atsume, and these are all things that people have these sort of social-like relationships with, but once they know that it's a computer, then they really, again, they view it as a machine. And finally, all the software people are using today, these things are really like, you type in git pull on the command line and then tune some parameters and you get some nice images out. I just don't see how you can understand how these things work and also think of them as artists in any meaningful sense. But the good news and the exciting thing is that, as I mentioned in history, new technology helps art stay vital and creates these new forms of expression and new kinds of culture. And so, it's hard to predict how this will happen, except that it will happen. So here's Les Paul, the main innovator of the electric solid body guitar. He played nice jazz and country swing tunes. And there's no way, I think, he could have predicted how his invention would have changed culture and music over the following decades. So, in that spirit, John asked me to just talk about some of the trends and things going on these days. So, I'm going to talk about a lot of, I'm a little more technology focused here, but some of the types of work that I think is most exciting and the things that lead to what might be happening next. So, there's a few themes in this kind of work. A lot of it is just exploring new looks, new aesthetics, and new tools. But another theme we see here is this back and forth between art and research, that a lot of the artists that I'm going to talk about are people who are reading technical papers and downloading code as soon as researchers share on the web and kicking the tires in that code. They're really, like, if you want to be an early adopter in any kind of art form, you have to be willing to get your hands dirty with whatever that technology is, just the way like early photographers had to learn about chemicals and lenses in a way that we don't now. There is, even though I obviously don't believe in this, to some degree a lot of these artists talk about collaborating with the software, treating the software as an artist, or does that mean anything? And I'll talk about the other ones later. But just as a reminder, there's still active generative art that has nothing to do with machine learning, AI, or data. These are just two artists who I think are great that I follow. These are their Instagram and Twitter handles. They just sit down and they write code, and that code makes pictures, no machine learning, and it's just these guys are just endlessly fascinating. The modern era of machine learning, as you may know, really owes its inception to this ImageNet data set, which is the foundation of a lot of artworks as a result. It was gathered at Stanford. It's the first very large label data set, which then led to the first successful neural networks for these tasks. Here's a visualization of the training subset of that data set by Jason Salavon. So this is an artwork which is meant to arrange. So this is really artwork that is kind of both a visual experience as well as a visualization of these existing data. Each column here corresponds to one of the categories in the data set. So you can kind of get a sense of the sort of the overall look, and you can kind of zoom in. You actually walk up to it, you get a little closer sense of what these images look like. This data set was used to train a lot of the earliest successful models. One of those models was then used for the deep dream algorithm. And so this is not the best example of it, but you run deep dreams on almost any image, and you get, with certain settings, you get a bunch of dogs appearing in it. And the reason for that is that the image data set is 10% dog categories. And the reason for that is historical reasons in the way these data sets were constructed. So there's sort of like this kind of bias in the way the data set was constructed for historical reasons that affected these artworks that came out of it. If you are interested in working in this space, like kind of three of the main tools a lot of people are using are generative adversarial networks, as was mentioned in the previous talk, and then image translation techniques, as were also mentioned, pix-to-pix and cycleGAN. And they have different attributes, but they both essentially used to be very similar. And I would say that the most common kind of artworks people are making are things with GANs, where they generate new images from an existing data set. A lot of these, there's a particular model, this is the technical paper that was used for it called BigGAN, that was trained on that same image data set. So they essentially have this generative model of any image that can come from those 1,000 categories of ImageNet. And this was a technical paper used to create, that was attempting to create realistic images, and then that data is now part of this artreader.com website. In a very short period of time from researchers published this data set to their website, or this out of the website, and suddenly an artist, in this case Joel Simon, is using that code to make this new tool. Artreader.com is great. It's super fun. It's a way to explore the sets of images that generative model can create, and to collaboratively remix them with images that other people have created. It's a little hard to explain quickly, but it's just endlessly fascinating to see what kind of images this neural network will produce. One aspect of that's going on with this sort of close collaboration of artists and researchers is a lot of people are now sharing their work on Twitter. So in this case, Jason showing one experiment he did. This is not an artwork that he shared, he just posted this on Twitter, and here's the thing I'm doing. Another artist I like a lot is Mario Klingman. And when that big GAN model I mentioned was first posted online, he started posting, exploring around in that model space and telling stories based on images he created using that model. So he was downloading the code, running the code, and then using it to make these images. One thing people talk about, so the interesting questions that happen in the following discussion after these sort of thing is not, is it art or not, but what makes it good art, or what is the author's role in this process? So this is a slide from Helena Sarin. And she's essentially arguing that you're going to have a better work of art, and you're going to have one which you've had more control of and more of a voiceover if you have created your own data and you have built your own outcome, or you've done some combination of existing data, existing outcome in your own data. There's some artwork out there where people have basically downloaded existing code, pressed a button, produced an image. And that stuff is just not very interesting, it's not very unique. It's really about how these artists are guiding the whole process from start to finish in terms of both the data and the algorithms. Here's another Twitter experiment from also Mario Klingman. Here he built his own data set on classical portraiture. And this is just the thing he posted on Twitter, just to share what he was doing. Later, he built an installation version of this, and this was auctioned at Sotheby's for $50,000. So, to me, part of the question is, so with GANs, there's already some fatigue. It's like, okay, people have explored this a lot in the art world, let's move on. I also think it's interesting, but it is interesting to think about why are these things so evocative and so powerful. So I have some thoughts about this. I can refer you to a paper on my website about discussing about the aesthetics of what makes these things so effective. Maybe I'll show a few more examples. This is an image translation. So this is an artist at Goldsmiths. He has trained something to translate from photographs to landscapes. And it's a much longer video I won't show here. So just, and there's an installation version where you can play with it yourself. Another artist who's worked with image translation is this guy, Scott Eaton. And he's a photographer. He has a large set of photographs he's taken of models in his studio. Here he is just drawing a picture as the input. And then here's the playback on the model he trained on his own photographs as the drawing is being updated. And he has a large set of really interesting sculptures and animations he's created with different explorations in this data set and different ways to train models. So those are artists working with GANs, and there's a lot of other interesting things. Happily, you don't have to use GANs. This fellow, Tom White, has created these images that, I have this at home, and I think when people see it, they don't think much of it necessarily. But once you know how it's made, it's a lot more interesting. These images are optimized through an algorithm to make existing image classifiers recognize these as specific things. So if you show this image to the state-of-the-art image classification algorithm, it will say this is a cello with very high confidence. And it will say that image on the left is an electric fan. And maybe this is the most interesting one. I don't know if you can tell what that is, but Google's and Amazon's recognition algorithms will say with 99% confidence, this is a filthy image. This is not safe for work. Finally, I'll mention, so I have a little slide about Gauguin, but this is already mentioned. So this is, if you want to play with these things, there's this package called Runway ML, which provides some sort of user interface. So you don't have to necessarily write your own code to use these things. That one seems like it might be a good one. Finally, I'll mention, as with the previous talk, there's a lot of art which is about AI, and it's not about using the technology itself. This is an installation. In the spirit of the fashion, the couture one from the previous talk, this is an artist who had a set of artists create portraits that would not be recognizable to face recognition. So how would you depict someone's face if you had to make sure that no one could tell who it is, or an algorithm couldn't tell who it is? Finally, I'll just mention one thing on the topic of bias, which I think is a real and serious issue, as covered in the previous talk. And if you want to learn more about that, one good starting point is book Weapons of Math Destruction. There's an artwork called ImageNet Roulette, which was online recently and got a lot of press. I think the press around the work was very misleading because it was presented as if this is the data set everyone's using, and the data set's extremely racist, which there are elements of truth to that, but it was extremely misleading. But there's a real truth to that. To me, the interesting part of this from the artistic point of view is that what the artists really did was they took this data set and they manipulated it and they fiddled it with it in certain ways, in such a way to exaggerate these aspects that were there. And through this sort of exaggeration and caricature is a big part of what makes art effective. But it's the first time I've heard of exaggeration to make an important social point through the process of manipulating a training data set and training an algorithm differently. And to me, that's really interesting. So just to conclude, summarize really, I think all these new technologies are tools that benefit art and artists. They are things that are you can't predict how people are going to use these things, only we can tell that really cool stuff is happening. I believe that art is a social activity. It's not something that we will engage, that non-social beings will engage in. So software won't be artists perhaps in our lifetime. But amazing new stuff is coming. Thank you.
Good job. That's amazing. Thanks a lot. Question?
Do you, 100 years ago, or maybe recently, go to art school and you get anatomy and drawing and painting and sculpture and you learn to manipulate paint and stuff like that. Do you see any of that becoming, I don't know, not obsolete, but there's not room really to have studios so much, or is taste changing where paintings will be less in demand, or drawings, or?
I think that's a complicated question because there are many different art worlds. So like when I took art classes, like they basically told us it's nothing. They said, go to the studio, here's some paint. I think if you go to one of the big, conceptual art, like the top schools, the big name ones like Cal Arts or Goldsmiths or whatever, then they're funneling you towards the conceptual art world. And they still have studio and they have crits, but painting is kind of frowned upon, I think, as a medium already. Within the more, the kind of work that collectors will buy, painting is kind of like treasure. It's like, it's a thing that people have a lot of attachment to. There are media arts schools that focus on writing code that have been around for decades, and those are much more about building technology as art. So I don't necessarily see that changing that much. I think that, that's my best guess. That those elements will still be there. It's just that which ones are more mainstream and more valued in the conceptual art world might change.
Thank you.
You mentioned briefly that some models are writing scripts and films, and so they're using language. And I've seen some of those, and they're really amusing. But I think that it's you can tell there's not like a social intention behind it. Do you imagine, with respect to conceptual art, that you could see a time where models might become, I'm not saying they would be intelligent, but be able to kind of get the gist of social constructs to be able to have a commentary on it of some sort?
Yeah, I think that's possible. So I think, I can definitely imagine building an algorithm that would analyze Twitter feed, news feeds, have a point of view, as it were, about what things are good or bad, at least superficially. You can say, I saw this news item and I was unhappy, and therefore here's the point I want to make about that. And at least at a shallow level, that thing would be, had a human made that, it would have been valid conceptual art.
Yeah.
But I think if you know that that's the process that originated it, then you wouldn't consider that the algorithm itself as the artist. Of course, that's just my opinion. I know that there are those who believe otherwise.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think it's interesting to think about that scenario as not necessarily like a collaborator, but a tool for a conceptual artist to use.
Yeah, I think the word collaborate. It's so hard to avoid anthropomorphic language when we talk about software. Like when you explain an algorithm, you say first it does this, and it decides that, and then it chooses this based on that. And it's just, if you don't use language that normally describes human thought, then it's impossible to understand. So I think collaborator is dangerous because it implies co-authorship and co-ownership. And I think when you collaborate with your watercolor, you know that the watercolor doesn't co-work.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you, Evan. This was amazing.